Welcome to Bore Me to Bed, the channel where we explore the world's most uneventful topics, calmingly slow, remarkably mundane, and guaranteed to soothe your mind. Whether it's the origin of wallpaper or the gentle evolution of spoons, these stories are here to help you drift peacefully to sleep. In tonight's episode, we're unraveling the story of socks, a slow, uneventful journey through history, exploring how this humble foot covering quietly stepped its way through time. So settle in, let the day gently fade away, and let me bore you to bed. The story of socks begins in the quiet darkness of prehistory, long before factories and fashion, long before anyone would have imagined a world full of colourful, cosy foot coverings. In those early days, the simple need to keep one's feet warm and protected was the mother of invention. Imagine a time tens of thousands of years ago, as evening falls on a group of nomadic people huddled around a flickering fire. One of them, weary from a day of walking over rough terrain, wraps his feet in soft animal skins to shield them from the cold ground. This humble act, padding the foot with whatever materials nature provided, is the very first chapter in the long and fascinating saga of the sock. As the night deepens and the fire crackles gently, you can almost see the ancient traveller carefully tying strips of leather around his ankles. These primitive socks are nothing more than scraps of hide or bundles of dried grasses, yet they provide a measure of comfort. They protect against sharp stones and the chill of the earth. In that quiet moment as stars wheel overhead, the first sock-like invention does its simple job. It is not glamorous or elegant. It is practical, born from the instinct to care for one's weary feet. And thus, even in prehistory, the journey of the sock quietly begins, footstep by footstep, warmth by warmth. Over time, those early humans discovered that wrapping their feet not only gave them warmth, but also helped prevent blisters and sores. The earth underfoot could be unforgiving. Rocky paths could cut the skin. Marshy ground could leach warmth from the bones. But with soft fur or woven reeds bound about their soles, life became just a little bit more comfortable. We can imagine that by day, these foot coverings might have been stiff and crude, but by night, drying near the fire, they grew softer and conformed to their owner's feet, almost like a second skin. In the cradle of civilization, even before the dawn of writing, the idea of the sock was taking root in the human mind as an item worth crafting and keeping. In fact, archaeologists have found that even in the Copper Age, around 3300 BC, travellers improvised socks. The famous Mummiotzi, the Iceman, was discovered with his leather shoes packed with dried grass, essentially using straw as insulating socks to protect his feet on his long-ago journey. As millennia passed, those makeshift foot coverings slowly evolved. What started as coarse wraps of hide and fibre would, in time, become more refined. Human societies learned to twist fibres into yarn and thread. With that innovation came the possibility of making fabrics, and one day, to knit or weave something shaped to fit the foot more snugly. The stage was being set for the sock to step out of mere prehistory and into the realm of history, where written records and artifacts would later tell their tale. For now, in our journey, the firelit caves and forest camps give way to the first great civilizations where the story of socks continues, quietly woven into the fabric of everyday life. When we step into the ancient world, we find that socks, or at least their early ancestors, quietly walked alongside the first civilizations. In ancient Egypt, for example, people crafted garments to cover their feet against the hot sun and dusty ground. We know this not just from writings, but from actual socks found preserved over the millennia. Imagine an archaeologist unwrapping a length of linen in a desert tomb only to reveal a surprisingly familiar object. A tiny sock, carefully knitted centuries ago. These Egyptian socks, dating from around the 3rd to 5th century AD, were marvels of early craftsmanship. Each was made using a technique called nail binding, a kind of precursor to knitting, and some even had an ingenious split-toe design. Why a split toe? It allowed the wearer to comfortably slip on sandals with a strap between the toes. Even back then, practical fashion was a consideration. One such sock discovered in Egypt is a reddish wool sock small enough to fit a child, with faded bands of colour. it still has a distinct separation for the big toe. One can almost imagine an Egyptian child long ago tugging on that warm little sock before putting on sandals for a day out in the bright sun by the Nile. Far to the east, in ancient China, socks were also quietly making their appearance. In a noble's tomb from the Han dynasty, around the 2nd century BCE, archaeologists found delicate silk socks. These were loose-fitting and had to be tied with small strings at the back to stay on. Silk was a luxurious material, soft and fine, indicating that these socks were likely worn by someone of high status. It's easy to picture an ancient Chinese noblewoman, or perhaps an official sitting on a wooden stool, gently fastening the silk ties of their finely woven socks before stepping into their shoes. The fact that such socks were placed in a tomb as part of the burial goods shows they were valued items. Even in the afterlife, one might wish for warm, comfortable feet. Meanwhile, in the rugged hills of ancient Greece, the poet Hesiod wrote in the 8th century BC about something he called piloi, a kind of sock made from matted animal hair. These would have been rudimentary by modern standards, likely scratchy and thick. We can imagine a Greek farmer or shepherd around a hearth at night, stuffing wool or animal hair into his sandals for extra warmth. Perhaps he takes wool clippings and felts them into a rough sock-like shape to wear inside his leather sandals. Hesiod's mention in his poem Works and Days suggests that even then socks, or foot coverings, were common enough to be noted in literature. They might not have been glamorous, but they were part of everyday life for those who could make them. The Romans, ever practical and inventive, took the idea of socks further. By the 2nd century AD, Roman legionaries and citizens alike had adopted a type of sock they called udones. Initially, many Romans simply wrapped strips of cloth or leather around their feet and lower legs for warmth, a practice common among soldiers in colder parts of the empire. But as time went on, they began sewing pieces of fabric together to create a fitted foot covering. These udones were essentially the first sewn socks, shaped roughly like our socks today, though they often had to be tied at the top to stay up since elastic did not exist. One might picture a Roman merchant early in the morning, getting dressed in a tunic and toga for a day in the forum, pulling on a pair of cloth udons and lacing up sandals over them on a chilly morning in the northern provinces. Or a Roman soldier in Britain, far from sunny Italy, gratefully wrapping woolen udons around his feet before putting on his hobnailed boots, warding off the damp cold. Interestingly, as Christianity spread through the late Roman world and into medieval Europe, socks took on a new symbolic meaning among certain devout people. By the 5th century AD, so the tales go, holy men and clerics in Europe would wear socks called puttees to symbolize purity and chastity. These were strips of cloth wound around the legs, more like leggings or bindings than the socks we know. But their whiteness and the care with which they were worn was a statement of virtue. In draughty stone monasteries, a monk might wrap clean white linens around his feet and calves, keeping warm while also adhering to a tradition that the pure of heart should have their feet covered as a sign of spiritual cleanliness. From the sands of Egypt to the villas of Rome, from the silk workshops of China to the hills of Greece, the earlier socks were slowly but surely making their mark. Each culture, isolated by geography, found its own solution to the problem of cold or sore feet. And yet, all of these solutions were converging on a single idea: a soft, enveloping garment specially shaped for the foot. The sock was no longer just a scrap of hide or a bundle of grass. It was becoming something deliberately crafted, something one might even take care in making or dyeing a pleasing colour. In these ancient times, socks had begun to step out of anonymity, becoming recognisable in form and increasingly an object of value and care. As the classical age gave way to the medieval era, socks, or stockings, as they were often called when they extended up the leg, continued to develop in both form and social significance. In the early Middle Ages, roughly 1,000 years ago, the average person did not own finely sewn or knitted socks. Such luxury was reserved for those of means. Common folk often relied on simple foot wraps, strips of cloth wound around the feet, a practice so enduring that it would persist in some Eastern European armies until the 20th century. One can imagine a humble farmer in medieval Europe waking before dawn to tend his fields. He might cut a clean strip of linen or wool, place it over his foot and carefully wrap it around and around up to his ankle, tying it off with a bit of twine. This makeshift covering would keep his feet warm inside his crude leather boots, though by day's end the cloth might be rumpled and damp. It wasn't ideal, but for many it was all they had. For the wealthy and noble, however, the Middle Ages offered a very different experience of foot fashion. As early as the 9th and 10th centuries, those with status began to wear stockings, snug-fitting tubes of brightly coloured cloth that covered the leg from foot to knee or even higher. These were often made of wool or silk and were individually crafted. Because elastic hadn't been invented, medieval stockings didn't cling on their own. Instead, men and women held them up with garters, bands or ribbons tied just below the knee. A nobleman dressing for a feast in a draughty stone castle might choose a pair of scarlet-red stockings to display beneath his tunic. He would tie a silk garter to keep each stocking from sliding down as he moved through the great hall. In those days, a flash of a well-clad calf in a rich-coloured sock was a subtle statement of wealth and style. During this period, full-length trousers were not common as they are today. Men often wore breeches, a kind of short pants that might reach the knee or mid-thigh, and their stockings covered the rest of the leg. In fact, in the earlier Middle Ages, these stockings were sometimes sewn to the breeches, forming a single combined garment that covered from waist to toe. Over time, fashion changed. Breeches became shorter, and stockings became longer to compensate, eventually meeting at the upper thigh. By around the 12th century, these long stockings began to be designed with a distinct foot portion, a shaped end for the foot rather than just a tube, making them more comfortable and fitted. We can picture a skilled craftsperson at this time, perhaps a member of a guild in a medieval town, carefully cutting and sewing cloth on a table by lamplight, shaping a pair of stockings to have a right and left foot. Each stitch is done by hand, and the resulting hose would fit snugly, following the contours of the ankle and heel. Colour was a notable feature of medieval hose and socks. Dyes from plants, roots, and insects produced vivid hues. Among nobility, it was fashionable to wear stockings in rich blues, bright yellows and deep greens. Some accounts even mention nobles wearing two different coloured stockings. One leg might be dressed in blue and the other in red for a harlequin effect, particularly during certain periods when such bold displays were in vogue. There was a language to these colours as well. In some places, certain colours or patterns on legwear could signify your allegiance to a lord or your membership in an order. For the general populace, whose clothes were mostly undyed or plain, seeing a lord ride by on horseback with legs clad in gleaming white or purple stockings must have been quite a sight, a moving splash of colour in a drab world. By the High Middle Ages, around the 13th and 14th centuries, knitting, the craft of looping yarn with needles to make fabric, began to spread through Europe, and with it came new possibilities for socks and stockings. Previously, many stockings were sewn from woven cloth, cut on the bias to give a bit of stretch, but knitting naturally produces a stretchy fabric, ideal for something like socks that need to accommodate movement and different shapes. At first, knitting was a skill practiced in the home or by skilled artisans for the elite. A lady-in-waiting might knit a pair of warm woolen socks as a gift for her lord, each stitch a tiny act of care and patience. Picture a gentlewoman sitting by a window on a winter's day, a basket of undyed wool yarn at her feet, knitting needles clicking softly as she shapes a heel. The sock grows slowly in her hands, a grey wool spiral that will soon cradle her husband's foot in comfort during his winter hunts. Socks and stockings were increasingly seen as items of value. In fact, by around the year 1000 AD and onward, fine hosiery was considered a symbol of affluence. Kings and princes took pride in their legwear. In medieval courts, one might hear mention of a particularly fine pair of hose gifted from one noble to another. They were treasures of the wardrobe. We even find that rules and regulations cropped up regarding who could wear what. Some cities had laws, early forms of fashion policing, that dictated the types of clothing different classes of people could wear. These were known as sumptuary laws, and stockings were not exempt from such scrutiny. In certain times and places, the lower classes were forbidden from wearing the luxurious colours or silks reserved for the nobility. Imagine a young merchant in 15th century London who was prospered enough to afford bright silk stockings like the ones he saw on a lord. He might be cautious stepping out in such finery, lest he attract unwanted attention, or even a fine for dressing above his station. Such was the power attributed to these garments. Even socks and stockings could be seen as statements of social order. As the medieval era progressed towards the Renaissance, the stage was set for even greater changes in how socks were made and who wore them. The world was on the brink of an age of exploration and innovation, and even the quiet story of socks would soon be swept up in the currents of change. But before that transformation arrived, the medieval sock had already established itself as both a creature of comfort and an emblem of status. It kept the peasant's foot from freezing and the noble's calf looking splendid. In cold abbeys, it warmed the pious, and in royal courts, it dazzled the fashion-conscious. The simplicity of its purpose, to warm and protect, was unchanged from the days of animal hide wrappings, but in form and meaning the sock had grown far beyond its humble origins. The Renaissance and the early modern period ushered in an era of refinement and innovation for socks and stockings. By the 1500s, knitting had firmly taken hold in Europe as both a cottage craft and a burgeoning industry. This was the age of elaborately dressed nobility and growing urban guilds, and legwear was not left out of the advancements of the time. One famous story from the late 16th century involves Queen Elizabeth I of England. In the year 1560, the Queen was gifted a pair of black silk stockings, a luxury item at the time, possibly from one of her ladies or a merchant seeking royal favour. According to accounts, Elizabeth was so delighted by the soft, fine knit of the silk on her legs that she declared she never wanted to wear linen stockings again. Silk had won Her Majesty's heart, or at least her feet. From then on, she wore silk stockings which were beautifully knit and often imported from Italy, or knitted by skilled artisans in England. This little anecdote shows just how prized good stockings had become. Even a queen took note when a particularly comfortable and elegant pair came her way. Around this same time, a remarkable invention was about to transform the world of sock making forever. In 1589, an English clergyman named William Lee created the first knitting machine, known as the stocking frame. Legend has it that Lee came upon the idea because the woman he was courting paid more attention to her knitting than to him. Whether truth or myth, what we do know is that his contraption could mechanically knit a piece of fabric much faster than hands alone. Imagine William Lee demonstrating his machine, a wooden frame with multiple hooks and needles cleverly arranged. He would push a bar or work pedals, and the hooks would dance back and forth, looping yarn into stitches. Before the eyes of astonished onlookers, a length of wool fabric emerged, already shaped like a stocking. In comparison to a hand knitter labouring for days to produce one sock, Lee's device was astonishingly quick. William Lee sought a patent for his knitting frame from Queen Elizabeth I, hoping for royal endorsement. But the Queen hesitated. She found that the wool stockings produced by Lee's early machine were coarser than the exquisitely fine hand-knit silk hose she preferred. There was also worry that this newfangled device could put skilled hand knitters out of work. So, Elizabeth denied Lee the patent and the patronage he needed. Undeterred, Lee took his invention across the English Channel. In France, he found a more receptive patron, King Henry IV. With the king's support, Lee established a stocking knitting workshop in Rouen. Though William Lee himself would pass away in relative obscurity, his machine lived on. The invention spread, slowly at first, through Europe. In the decades following, enterprising knitters and craftsmen improved on the design. Exiled French Huguenots, Protestants fleeing Catholic France, carried knowledge of frame knitting to other lands, including England and what is now Germany, spreading the technology of mechanical knitting. By the 17th century, the production of socks and stockings was a mix of handcraft and machine work. In cities like London and Paris, if one strolled down certain streets, the sound of clicking knitting frames might drift from workshop windows, a repetitive clatter of wood and metal echoing as workers pumped out stockings for the growing middle class. These frame knitters, often organised into guilds, could produce stockings much faster than before, making them more affordable. Wool stockings for everyday wear became more common among those who could afford a modest luxury. Meanwhile, the wealthy indulged in stockings of silk or fine cotton, now sometimes decorated with embroidery or lace clocks, small embroidered patterns near the ankles that showed off one's refinement. Yet hand knitting did not disappear. Far from it, it flourished alongside the machines. In countryside cottages across Europe, people still knitted socks by hand for their families or for local markets. In Scotland, for example, a tradition of knitting cosy socks and stockings took root among villagers. One could picture a scene in the Scottish Highlands. A shepherd resting on a hillside, his feet snug in thick socks, knitted by his wife from the wool of their own sheep. The socks might be naturally grey or brown, undyed, but exceedingly warm against the chill mist. In another part of Europe, say the hills of Spain or the coastline of Ireland, grandmothers passed down knitting skills through generations, each adding local flair to the patterns of their stockings. Cables, ribs, and other knit textures not only made the socks stretchier and warmer, but also gave them a decorative touch. As the 1700s progressed, cotton from India and the American colonies began to pour into European markets, and cotton stockings grew popular. Cotton was cooler than wool, and could be knit into a smooth, comfortable stocking for the warmer months. For the first time, a whole spectrum of materials, wool, silk, cotton and linen, were all available for making socks and stockings, each with its own advantages. A well-dressed gentleman in the 18th century might have woolen stockings for hunting, sturdy cotton ones for everyday city wear, and silken hose for formal court occasions. Ladies who wore long gowns that hid their legs nonetheless enjoyed pretty stockings as a private luxury, often in white or pastel shades with delicate patterns. During these times, socks were generally still long, often reaching the knee or above. The term sock originally implied a shorter covering, like the Latin soccus, a kind of slipper sock used by Roman actors, whereas stocking indicated a longer garment. But as we edged towards the 19th century, a shift in fashion was brewing. The age of revolutions, American, French, and the ensuing changes in societal norms also heralded a change in menswear. Long trousers began to replace knee breeches among men, a trend that started in the late 18th century and became the norm by the early 19th. With pants covering the legs fully, men's long stockings were gradually rendered unnecessary for daily wear. Instead, shorter socks that reached the calf or ankle came into everyday use, hidden underneath trouser legs. The word sock came back into prominence, referring to those shorter hosiery items worn by all classes. So as the world entered the 1800s, the stage was set for the modern sock to emerge triumphant. The knowledge and technology for making socks had spread far and wide. Knitting frames had been around for over 200 years, improving slowly, and hand knitting remained a beloved craft. Socks were no longer only for the rich or for specific occasions. They were becoming a staple of everyday dress for ordinary people. The march of invention was not done, however. In the coming industrial age, even greater changes would sweep through the sock industry, turning what was once a precious handmade item into a common commodity, and eventually giving rise to the cornucopia of sock styles we enjoy today. The Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries transformed the sock from a handcrafted treasure into a mass-produced staple. By the early 1800s, inventors and industrialists were applying steam power and new machinery to every kind of manufacturing, including the knitting of socks. The old wooden stocking frames evolved into larger, faster machines made of steel. Some were circular knitting machines that could knit a seamless tube, churning out the equivalent of socks in a continuous spiral that could be cut to length. In textile mills across England and Europe, one could see rows of machines operated mostly by women and men who tended the threads and inspected the output. The rhythmic whirring of gears and the hiss of steam created a new soundtrack for sock production. A single day in a Victorian sock factory could produce more socks than an entire guild of medieval knitters might have made in a month. As production increased, prices fell. By the mid-19th century, socks were affordable to nearly everyone. A working-class labourer in London could buy a pair of stout cotton or wool socks from a street vendor or a general store for a modest sum. These socks were plain and utilitarian, typically undyed or dyed black, grey or brown, intended for hardware inside heavy boots. In contrast, a gentleman of the city might purchase his socks from a draper, choosing finer weaves and perhaps a fashionable pattern. The Victorian era also saw the rise of department stores and catalogues, where socks and stockings were listed among the necessities of dress. A typical catalogue might offer men's merino wool half-hose and ladies' cotton stockings in various sizes and colours. Socks had become thoroughly democratised. No longer a sign of privilege, they were an everyday item for people from all walks of life. Amid this industrial boom, some regions became particularly renowned for sock manufacturing. For instance, a town in England's Midlands or a city in New England might have been known for its hosiery mills. These places earned nicknames like Sock Town or the hosiery capital due to the sheer volume of socks produced. Thousands of workers were employed in scouring wool, spinning yarn, knitting socks, and finishing them. Finishing often included sewing the toe seam — early machines still required a bit of hand sewing to close the toe of each sock — and checking for defects. Bundles of socks would then be shipped by rail or steamship to markets around the world. The quality of socks also gradually improved. The 19th century brought scientific progress in dyes and materials. Chemists developed colour-fast synthetic dyes, so socks could hold bright colours without fading or bleeding. One could buy socks in deep navy blues, rich forest greens, or even new aniline purple shades, and trust that the colour would endure through many washes. Blends of fibres were sometimes used. For example, a bit of elasticized material was occasionally woven into the top of socks even before true elastic to help them stay up. And as the century drew to a close, companies began to brand their socks, priding themselves on durable heels and toes that wouldn't wear out quickly. The turn of the 20th century saw socks and stockings enter the modern age of fashion and functionality. Men mostly wore socks that reached mid-calf, hidden under the trousers of newly fashionable suits. Women, bound by the fashion of long skirts, still wore thigh-high stockings, often held up by garters or the new invention of elasticized suspenders, garter belts. An interesting development came in 1938 with the invention of nylon by the DuPont company. Nylon was a wonder fibre, smooth as silk but much stronger and more elastic. While it first took the women's hosiery market by storm, leading to the famous nylons that became a coveted item, especially during and after World War II, nylon also found its way into socks of all kinds. Blended with wool or cotton, nylon added strength and helped socks hold their shape. A pair of socks made in the 1940s might be labelled cotton blend, quietly including a percentage of nylon to make them longer lasting and snug. World events also left their imprint on the story of socks. During World War I, 1914 to 1918, for instance, soldiers fighting in the cold, wet trenches of Europe suffered terribly from trench foot, a painful condition caused by cold, damp feet. The humble sock became a soldier's crucial line of defence against this affliction. Armies urgently needed vast quantities of warm, dry socks to issue to troops. On the home front, a great movement arose. People everywhere knit socks for the soldiers. In living rooms and parlours from America to Australia, one could find volunteer knitters, often women, children and the elderly, diligently working with khaki or grey wool yarn, fashioning socks to send overseas. Many had never knitted a sock before, but patterns were distributed by organisations like the Red Cross. A typical scene might involve a mother and daughter sitting by an oil lamp in the evening, knitting needles in hand, quietly counting stitches for the heel turn of a sturdy sock destined for a faraway soldier. These efforts provided not only physical warmth and comfort to the troops, but also a tangible reminder that people back home cared for them, one stitch at a time. After the wars, in the mid-20th century, socks found new ways to make cultural appearances. The 1950s in America, for example, had an interesting youth fad: sock hops. These were informal dances often held in school gyms or community halls, where teenagers would literally kick off their shoes and dance in their socks to the rock and roll tunes of the day. Gymnasium floors were kept scuff-free by this practice of dancing in stocking feet. So the sock lent its name to a fun, carefree social gathering. At these sock hops, one might picture bobby socksers, teenage girls named for the cute bobby socks they wore. White ankle socks often folded down neatly. Twirling in poodle skirts, and boys in cuffed jeans sliding across the floor in their argyle-patterned socks. The term bobby socks itself had entered the lexicon to describe the ankle socks popular with young women, signalling youthful energy and a hint of rebellion, since showing a bit of ankle in shorter socks was a departure from the more modest, longer socks of previous generations. Meanwhile, innovations in fibres continued. In the 1960s, a revolutionary material called spandex, also known by brand names like Lycra, was invented. Spandex could be blended in small quantities into sock yarn to provide tremendous elasticity. By the late 20th century, most socks had a bit of spandex or similar material in the cuffs, helping them stay up without sagging, but without the constriction of old garters. The 1970s saw the rise of the athletic tube sock, a thick, usually white cotton sock with colourful stripes at the top, which became a universal accessory for gym class and casual wear. Worn pulled up to the knee or scrunched down to the ankle, these tube socks had no shaped heel, hence the tube name, and could fit a variety of foot sizes easily, making them cheap to produce and popular worldwide. In the 1980s, fashion took another interesting turn as neon colours and bold patterns became trendy, and socks were no exception. One might recall slouchy socks layered over leggings as part of aerobics wear, or children running around in neon pink or green socks just for fun. By the end of the 20th century and into the 21st, socks came in more varieties than ever. There were thin nylon dress socks for formal occasions, cozy thermal socks for winter sports, smooth silk or bamboo fibre socks for those seeking luxury or sustainability, and fun novelty socks emblazoned with everything from cartoon characters to famous artworks. Socks were not just an accessory, but sometimes a statement, a flash of personality peeking out between trouser cuff and shoe. Even leaders and celebrities got in on the quiet sock revolution. In recent years, for example, a certain Canadian Prime Minister became known for sporting bright, whimsical socks featuring patterns like geometric shapes or even characters from science fiction, sparking conversations and smiles at high-level meetings. A former US president in his later years took to wearing bold, colourful socks, from loud stripes to Superman emblems, to enliven his appearance and delight visitors. These instances show that socks have transcended their basic role and can be playful extensions of one's identity. On a more everyday level, the late 20th century also saw a boom in the sock industry's globalization. Places like Fort Payne, a small town in Alabama, proudly billed themselves as the sock capital of the world in the mid-1900s through the early 2000s. As numerous mills, they produced millions of pairs annually. But as global trade expanded, production shifted even further. By the early 21st century, Datang, a district in Zhuji, China, had earned the nickname Sock City for its astonishing output of socks, billions of pairs a year, a significant fraction of the world's supply produced in sprawling modern factories. Yet, even with this mass production, the essence of the sock remains the same as it ever was, a comfortable covering for our feet, an everyday companion that quietly does its duty. Today, if you peek into a dresser drawer in any given home, you might find a row of neatly paired socks, perhaps some athletic socks for running, a dressy pair or two for special occasions, thick wool socks for cold nights, and those quirky ones with ducks or stars that just make you happy to wear. Each pair has a story rooted in centuries of refinement and innovation, even if we seldom pause to think about it. But as we've seen, from the rattling frames of the Industrial Revolution to the knitting needles of a caring grandmother, from the silkwork farms of China to the bustling market stalls of ancient Egypt, the sock has journeyed far and wide to end up here in our modern lives, hugging our feet with warmth and comfort. Now that we have journeyed through time with the sock, let us gently pull back the curtain on how a sock comes into being. Whether crafted by hand or mass-produced in a factory, The making of a sock is a process filled with care and ingenuity. Imagine first the old-fashioned way, a lone knitter seated comfortably by the hearth on a winter's evening, crafting a sock stitch by stitch. She starts with a ball of yarn, perhaps wool she spun herself from a sheep shearing last spring, or cotton thread purchased from the town market. The yarn is soft in her hands as she casts on stitches using 4 slender, double-pointed needles, a traditional method to knit in the round and form a seamless tube. The needles click softly, a rhythmic, soothing sound, almost like a quiet lullaby of metal on wood. To begin, she knits the cuff, the top band of the sock. If it's a sock for everyday wear, she might choose a simple rib stitch, alternating knits and purls, that makes the fabric elastic and able to hug the calf gently. Row by row, the cuff grows, perhaps an inch or 2 in length, forming that stretchy top that will keep the sock from slipping down. Once the cuff is complete, she transitions to the leg portion. This could be a plain knit if the sock will be hidden under trousers, or maybe she adds a little pattern, a cable twist or a small motif, if she's feeling creative. The motions of her hands are steady and practiced. With each loop of yarn through another, she's shaping something both practical and almost magical, creating clothing out of mere string. When the length of the leg is just right, she comes to what many consider the trickiest part of sock knitting, the heel. The heel needs to form a curve, a pocket that will cradle the back of the foot. Our knitter pauses in her circular knitting to work back and forth rows, shaping a sturdy heel flap that will lie under the heel and up the back of the foot. Perhaps she reinforces this section with a special stitch, slipping some stitches without knitting them, to make the fabric thicker and more durable against wear. Then comes the gentle curve of the heel turn. By decreasing, knitting 2 stitches together, and carefully picking up stitches along the sides of the heel flap, she creates a cup shape. It's like watching a flat piece of knitting suddenly bloom into 3 dimensions, curving just so. With the heel cup formed, she resumes knitting in the round, now incorporating those held stitches for the top of the foot and the newly shaped heel. She works the foot of the sock, which stretches smoothly towards the toes. Finally, the toe itself is shaped by gradually decreasing stitches on both sides, narrowing the tube until it matches the shape of the toe box of a foot. When only a few stitches remain, she performs a neat little maneuver called the Kitchener stitch, grafting the ends together to create a seamless closed toe. The sock is done. A small marvel of engineering and art, ready to keep a loved one's foot warm and snug. She holds it up in the firelight, inspecting her work, maybe trimming an errant end of yarn. In that single sock is the culmination of hours of patient work and generations of passed down knowledge. Now, contrast this intimate scene with the hustle and buzz of a modern sock factory. Picture a large, well-lit room filled with rows of machines. Each machine is about the size of a large refrigerator and has dozens of knitting needles not held by human hands, but arranged around a cylinder. Instead of 1 sock at a time, these automated circular knitting machines can knit many socks a day, each one programmed with a desired size and pattern. High above, spools of yarn feed down into the machines. One spool of soft combed cotton, another of springy elastic nylon, maybe a strand of lycra, and yet another of dyed yarn to add stripes or patterns. The machine hums and small hooks flash in a blur, interlacing loops at lightning speed. In a matter of minutes, out comes a tube of fabric, the makings of a sock. These machines are marvels in their own right. They replicate the same loops that our hand knitter made, but they do it with mechanical precision. They can switch yarns to create stripes of different colours, or drop stitches to make a ventilating mesh for sports socks, all controlled by a preset program, in modern times, often a computer. Many socks today, for example, have intricate patterns, argyle diamonds, cartoon characters, brand logos, which the machine knits directly into the fabric by alternating yarn colours according to a chart. To the human eye, it looks like the machine is practically spitting out finished socks, but there are still human hands involved in the process, guiding and overseeing. When a sock emerges from the knitting machine, it is usually a tube with an open toe, like a sleeve that hasn't been closed at one end. This is because it's easier for the machine to knit a continuous tube. The next step is to give the sock its toes. In many factories, the socks are taken to another station for linking or seaming. In older factories, skilled workers would take each sock and use a small sewing or linking machine to close the toe with a neat seam. Nowadays, there are highly automated machines that can do loop linking, essentially duplicating the knit so that the toe is closed almost invisibly, creating what's called a seamless toe. If you've ever worn a sock that doesn't irritate you with a ridge at the toes, you might have a seamless toe sock, a little gift of modern manufacturing techniques that make socks more comfortable than ever. After the knitting and seaming, the socks aren't quite ready to be worn yet. They often go through a process of washing and blocking. In the factory setting, newly knit socks are washed to remove any machine oils or sizing, and to allow the fibres to relax into their final shape. Then they may be stretched over metal frames or boards in the shape of a foot and leg. This is called blocking or boarding. Imagine rows of sock-shaped boards, each with a damp sock pulled over it, going through a low-temperature dryer or steamer. This sets the shape and size of the sock so it will reliably fit as intended. A cotton sock, for instance, might shrink a bit when first washed, so this step ensures it shrinks to the correct size and not further. Once dry and set, the socks slide off the boards, each one crisply shaped like a proper sock, with its cuff, leg, heel, and toe perfectly in place. Quality control is a part of the manufacturing journey as well. Under soft lights, inspectors carefully examine random socks from each batch. They check that the stitches are all even, that there are no holes or snags, that the sizing is correct and that pairs match in length. Any loose threads are trimmed. Socks that don't meet the standards, perhaps one came out with a weak spot in the knit, are pulled out. The vast majority, however, pass muster. From there, the socks are paired, either by hand or machine. Sometimes a little metal clip or a light adhesive holds a pair together, folded neatly and packaged. They may be wrapped with a simple band of cardboard giving the size and fibre content, or tucked into a box if they're a higher-end product. At last, they are shipped out, sent to stores or directly to customers around the world. In a sense, the journey that began with humble raw materials, a tuft of wool from a sheep's back, a tuft of cotton from a field, or synthetic fibres born in a chemist's lab, has culminated in that familiar form of a sock, ready to begin its real purpose in life, to warm and protect someone's foot. It's interesting to note that despite the automation and scale of modern sock manufacturing, many of the fundamental steps mirror the hand-knitting process. There's the formation of the leg, the shaping of the heel. Even on machines, a different stitching process forms the heel pocket, the creation of the toe, and the finishing touches. The biggest difference is speed and volume. A single factory can produce in a day what once took entire villages of knitters months or years. And the variety is astounding. Athletic socks knit with padding on the soles and breathable mesh on top. Hiking socks made from moisture-wicking wool blends to keep feet dry on the trail. Dress socks so thin and fine that they slip easily into a polished shoe. And even compression socks that are specially knit to gently squeeze the legs and improve circulation. The materials too have expanded. Where once socks were only of wool or silk for the rich, now one finds soft cotton, durable synthetics, eco-friendly bamboo viscose, luxurious cashmere, and blends of all kinds. Each material brings its own feel, the cozy warmth of wool, the smooth lightness of silk, the breathability of cotton, the stretch and longevity of nylon. Manufacturers choose and blend these fibres like chefs crafting a recipe, aiming for the perfect balance of comfort, durability, warmth, and stretch for the sock's intended use. In sum, the creation of a sock today is the product of both age-old techniques and modern ingenuity. Whether hand-knit by a loving artisan or spun out by the thousands in a state-of-the-art facility, every sock goes through a journey of forming and shaping, guided by human knowledge and creativity. And when you next pull on a pair of socks, if you think about it, you carry on your feet the outcome of this long story. A story of craft, technology, and care that spans from the quiet click of needles by a fire to the busy hum of a factory floor. Beyond their practical purpose, socks have quietly woven themselves into the cultures and traditions of people around the world. They are seldom the star of the show, and yet, if one looks closely, These humble foot coverings carry meanings and stories that reflect human creativity, belief, and even humour. Consider, for example, the land of Japan, where a particular style of sock has been a part of traditional dress for centuries. The Japanese have tabi socks, distinctive split-toe socks, usually white, that are worn with kimono and the thonged sandals called zori. Tabi socks date back to the 15th century or so, and they have a pragmatic design. The divided toe allows the wearer to comfortably fit into sandals or wooden clogs. But beyond practicality, tabi became embedded in cultural aesthetics. A geisha in Edo period Japan, preparing for an evening performance, would carefully pull on tabi socks before stepping into her exquisite kimono and lacquered gaiter sandals. The clean white of the socks symbolized purity and elegance, peeking subtly under the hem of her kimono as she walked. Even today, traditional tea ceremonies and weddings in Japan often feature participants in tabi, connecting them to a lineage of attire that has remained unchanged in its elegance and formality. Travel westward in our imaginations to the Highlands of Scotland, and we find socks playing a role in a very different way. The Scottish kilt, that famous tartan skirt worn by Highland men, is traditionally paired with knee-high socks often adorned with garters and flashes, little decorative strips of fabric. These kilt hose, as they're called, often feature a pattern or colour scheme that complements the tartan of the kilt. In clan tradition, specific tartan patterns are associated with different families or regions, and this extends to the socks as well. A Highland chieftain at a gathering might don tartan kilt socks, knitted with a design that incorporates his clan's colours, making even his lower legs a testament to his lineage. Historically, women in Scottish villages would knit these socks with intricate cable patterns or plaid designs. The patterns were not random. They could carry local significance or simply showcase the knitter's skill. In a way, a well-crafted pair of tartan socks told a story of family and pride even before the wearer spoke a word. And of course, Scotland also gave the world the famous Argyll pattern, a diamond criss-cross design derived from the tartan of Clan Campbell of Argyll. This pattern, popularised in the 20th century for golf socks and sweaters, actually has its roots in those Highland hose, and wearing Argyll socks today is unknowingly echoing a Scottish tradition hundreds of years old. Now let's journey to the cold north of Norway. Here the winters are long and dark, and for generations people have turned to wool, not just for warmth, but for storytelling. Norwegian knitted socks, and their close cousins, mittens and sweaters, are renowned for their beautiful complex patterns. Stars, snowflakes and other geometric motifs in contrasting colours, often white and a deep indigo or red, decorate these garments. Many of these patterns have been passed down through families. They sometimes carry echoes of Norse mythology or local folklore. One pattern might be named after a legend of a snowflake that froze a queen's heart. Another might represent protective symbols to ward off misfortune during the long sea voyages that Norwegian fishermen undertook. A pair of Norwegian wool socks, thick and warm, might feature bands of motifs that, to the untrained eye, are simply lovely decorations. But to someone from the region, they might recall an old tale or a piece of cultural heritage. Think of a grandmother in a Norwegian village, knitting by the light of a window, perhaps working a pattern her grandmother taught her. In each stitch, there is a connection to ancestors and an affirmation of identity. When her grandson pulls those socks on before heading out into the snow, he carries a bit of that heritage with him, quite literally woven around his feet. Across the globe in India, the cultural tapestry of clothing usually focuses on vibrant silks and intricate embroidery for garments like saris and shawls. Socks, being less visible, don't feature as prominently in historical records. After all, many traditional Indian outfits involve sandals or going barefoot indoors. But in modern times, India's love of colour and design has certainly extended to socks. Wander through a bustling marketplace in a city like Jaipur or Delhi, and you might find stalls selling socks in every hue imaginable, from bright marigold orange to deep peacock blue, sometimes embellished with sequins or gold thread if intended for a festive occasion. It's not uncommon during certain festivals or weddings to see people wearing socks that match the celebratory mood, perhaps with motifs of flowers or embroidered borders. In a country where giving gifts is an art, a nicely wrapped pair of quality socks might be given as a practical yet thoughtful present, perhaps alongside other items symbolising a wish for the recipient's comfort and well-being. And while India might not have an ancient sock tradition to rival its centuries-old textiles, the modern embrace of the sock is very much in line with the culture's appreciation for vibrant, comfortable attire. Socks also appear in the rituals and narratives of other cultures. In many Muslim cultures, cleanliness for prayer is paramount, and socks play a role in ritual purity. Devout individuals wash their feet in ablution and often put on clean socks before praying, as a part of feeling prepared and pure. In some Native American traditions, moccasins were worn with fur or textile wrappings, which could be seen as a form of sock, though they were integrated with the shoe. The variation is endless, from the hand-knit wool booties of the Andes, decorated with bright natural dyes, to the sturdy knitted socks of the Balkans, often made in bold geometric patterns that may signify the village of origin. One cannot discuss the cultural significance of socks without mentioning one of the most beloved traditions involving an oversized sock, the Christmas stocking. All across the Western world, and in many other places now too, children know the excitement of hanging a big, festive sock by the fireplace or at the foot of their bed on Christmas Eve, hoping to find it filled with treats by morning. The origin of this practice is often traced to the legend of St. Nicholas, a kind bishop from the 4th century who had a habit of secret gift-giving. The story goes that he learned of a poor man with 3 daughters who had no dowry, meaning the daughters might be sold into servitude or worse, as they could not marry without money. Wishing to help without embarrassing the family, Nicholas crept by their house at night and dropped 3 small pouches of gold down the chimney. By happy chance, those little bags of gold landed in the stockings or socks that the daughters had hung by the hearth to dry. When the family awoke, they found their fortunes had changed, literally overnight, thanks to the gold that glinted inside their hanging socks. This tale of generosity and surprise took hold in the popular imagination. Over centuries it evolved into the Christmas stocking tradition, the idea that a gift giver, whether St. Nicholas, Santa Claus or Father Christmas, would leave presents in one's stocking. Even the token of putting an orange at the toe of a Christmas stocking, a custom many families practice, harkens back to the gold in the legend, as oranges were once a rare and sweet treasure, the size and colour of a golden coin. Thus, a simple sock hung by the fireplace becomes a symbol of hope and generosity on Christmas night. Many a child has gone to sleep with eyes squeezed shut, trying to stay good and patient, thinking of the empty stocking waiting to be filled. And many a parent late at night has quietly filled that stocking with candies, small toys, and perhaps a new pair of actual socks rolled up inside, smiling to themselves at the joy it will bring in the morning. Socks also find their way into language and common expressions, underscoring their presence in daily life. If someone says, "Pull up your socks," it's understood as an idiom meaning "get ready," or "prepare to work harder," a phrase likely born from the action of straightening one's socks before getting down to business. To knock someone's socks off means to astonish or impress them mightily. A playful image as if a surprise could be so jarring that it literally shakes one's socks off their feet. And an old British saying, often cooed to children, is "bless your cotton socks," an endearing way to express fondness or gratitude, as if to say the person is so lovely that even their socks, being cotton and humble, are blessed. Each of these expressions, casual and colloquial, hints at how socks, though mundane, are woven into our thoughts and speech as symbols of comfort, preparedness, and down-to-earth charm. In the realm of sports and superstition, socks enjoy a peculiar status. Athletes are known for their rituals and lucky charms, and socks are no exception. It's not unheard of to find a tennis player who insists on wearing the same lucky socks every match, carefully washed, one hopes, or a football player who has to put on his left sock before his right for good luck. In baseball lore, players during a winning streak might play game after game without changing their socks, a superstition born from not jinxing the streak, though it surely tests the olfactory tolerance of their teammates. Even in team identities, socks have played a colourful role. Two of America's famous baseball teams, the Boston Red Sox and the Chicago White Sox, derived their names from the coloured hose their earliest players wore in the early 1900s. Back then, teams often identified by the colour of their stockings as much as by city names. Fans would cheer on the red stockings or the white stockings, which over time got shortened to socks in a friendly, informal way. To this day, those team names are a little tribute to the humble sock and its place in sports history. Socks have even marched into the world of art and play. Consider the sock puppet. Take a clean sock, put your hand in it, and suddenly it can become a little character with the addition of buttons for eyes, or a drawn-on mouth. Sock puppets have been a staple of low-cost, imaginative entertainment for children and adults alike. A parent might wiggle a sock on their hand to amuse a baby, speaking in a silly voice. A child might create a whole cast of characters from a drawer of odd socks on a rainy afternoon. This simple toy has even been elevated to the stage. One famous puppet character in children's television history is Lamb Chop, a sweet little lamb who was in fact a sock puppet brought to life by puppeteer Shari Lewis. With just a bit of fabric and a lot of creativity, a sock transcends its usual role and becomes a storyteller. Then there's the sock monkey, an iconic homemade toy especially popular in North America. Typically crafted from a pair of red-heeled work socks, these monkeys first became widespread in the early 20th century. During the Great Depression, resourceful mothers and grandmothers repurposed worn-out socks into toys, since buying new dolls or teddy bears was a luxury few could afford. With some cutting and stitching, a heel of a sock becomes a monkey's mouth. The cuff becomes the top of its head, and the rest forms its lanky limbs and tail. Stuffed with scrap fabric or cotton, and decorated with a little hat or buttons for eyes, the sock monkey brought comfort and joy to many children, proving that even an old sock can have a second life full of love. In modern social causes, socks have surprisingly taken on a quiet symbolism. Take for instance World Down Syndrome Day, observed each year on March 21st. A relatively recent tradition to raise awareness as people wear mismatched socks on that day. Why socks? Because chromosomes, which are the focus in Down syndrome, an extra copy of the 21st chromosome, under a microscope look a bit like paired socks. Wearing bright, unmatched socks becomes a cheerful way to celebrate differences and spark conversations about inclusion and understanding. Similarly, people sometimes hold sock drives for the homeless. It's a well-known fact among shelter organisers that clean socks are one of the most needed and appreciated items for people experiencing homelessness. A fresh pair of socks can provide warmth, comfort, and a sense of dignity to someone who spends their days on the streets. Thus, socks become a symbol of caring and community support. In these small acts, a goofy mismatched sock outfit to promote kindness, or a donated bundle of socks to someone in need, the sock carries a meaning of solidarity and compassion. Last but not least, socks often make us chuckle in everyday life. There's the eternal mystery of the missing sock, how one sock of a pair seems to vanish in the laundry, a phenomenon so common it's become a household joke worldwide. People half-seriously blame sock elves, or dryers that must secretly consume socks. Some creative souls have even written mock-serious theories about the parallel universe where all those lost socks go. The result of this quirky problem is the pile of lonely mismatched socks that many of us accumulate. And yet, even those loners can find purpose, be it as dust rags, pet toys, or as we saw, puppets. So in a way, the story of socks even touches on the philosophical, nudging us to ponder the small everyday mysteries of life, albeit with a smile. All these threads, the traditions, the language, the superstitions, the crafts and charities, weave a rich tapestry of cultural significance around socks. It's fascinating that something so ordinary and ubiquitous can carry such a variety of meanings to different people. Socks might signify warmth and home, like a grandmother knitting by the fire, or festivity and generosity, like a stocking full of gifts. They might signal heritage, a tartan sock of a Scottish clan, or stand for a cause, a loud mismatched pair for awareness. They bring comfort, they provide laughs, and they quietly continue to be a part of human life in ways both big and small. In the gentle, winding journey we've taken through the story of socks, we see that they are far more than just pieces of fabric for our feet. They are tiny historical records of human innovation, cultural artifacts carrying symbols and stories, and everyday friends that cushion our steps. The next time you roll up a pair of socks from the laundry, or pull on your favourite pair on a cold morning, perhaps you'll remember a snippet of their long story. It might be the echo of an Egyptian weaving a sandal sock with care, or a hint of a grandma's loving stitches, or simply an appreciation for how something so quiet and unassuming has been a constant companion to people through all ages and across all lands. In that reflection, there's a comforting thought. As we walk forward into each new day, the story of socks continues on with us, one soft step at a time. As you settle in, maybe even now feeling the gentle warmth of socks around your own feet, you carry with you this rich legacy without even realizing it. Those soft threads hugging your toes are the end result of countless generations of innovation and care. It's comforting to think that something so simple, which we slip on without a second thought each morning, has a history entwined with the history of human civilization itself. From the earliest wanderers wrapping hides around their feet to the skilled artisans and whirring machines of today, the sock has journeyed through time to be with you here and now. Perhaps, as you drift off to sleep, you'll wiggle your toes, feel that coziness, and smile at the notion that in this very ordinary comfort lies an extraordinary tale. And so, our story of socks comes to a close, wrapping around us as gently as a favourite pair of bedtime socks, quiet and reassuring, a small but faithful guardian of our dreams as we step together into the quiet night.